You're the son we don't brag about. My mom used to say every Thanksgiving while my brother smirked and my dad let it land. At my parents' anniversary dinner, Dad told everyone to share the one thing they were most proud of. My brother went first. My sister went next. When it got to me, I opened one email, and Dad's glass stopped midair. My name is Elliot. I'm 31. I work in warehouse logistics. I manage a team of 23 people at a distribution center that moves $40 million in product annually. I've been promoted 3 times in 7 years. I make $97,000. I've been published in 3 industry journals. I have a folder in my work email labeled Nice Ones that contains 41 thank you messages from current and former employees. None of this information exists inside my family. To them, as far as anyone at that anniversary dinner knew before I opened my mouth, I move boxes. My brother Craig is 34. VP at Meridian Tech, $118,000 salary. My family can recite his title, his salary, his office square footage, and the name of the restaurant where he celebrated his last promotion. My sister Lauren is 29, engaged to Dr. Whitfield, orthodontist. My family knows his specialty, his practice zip code, and the carat weight of the ring. I am 31. I run a 23-person team and a $40 million pipeline. I have been published in 3 industry journals, one on cold chain optimization, one on warehouse layout efficiency, one on workforce retention in distribution. My name is in print in publications that sit on the desks of operations directors across the country. My family knows I do something with warehouses. Craig once asked at Thanksgiving what I actually do all day, and when I said logistics, he said, "So, moving stuff from A to B," and Judith laughed, and I said, "Yeah, something like that," and cut my turkey. That's the gap. That's the system. That's everything I carried into Arnetta's restaurant on October 14th in the pocket of a jacket I ironed at 11 p.m. the night before. But first, the system. My mother Judith has a tradition. Every Thanksgiving, sometime between the turkey and the pie, she goes around the table and does a family update for whoever is listening. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors she's invited because Judith doesn't believe in small gatherings. Craig's promotion. Lauren's engagement. My father Glenn's golf handicap, which he's improved by 2 strokes this year, and which he'll tell you about whether you ask or not. And then she gets to me. And every year, for as long as I can remember, she says some version of the same line. And Elliot is, well, you know Elliot. He's the son we don't brag about. She delivers it with a small laugh, like it's an inside joke the whole table is in on. The table laughs. Craig smirks. That particular smirk where one side of his mouth goes up and his eyes don't change temperature. Glenn chews. And I sit there holding a fork I'm not using and a smile I'm not feeling, and I let it land, because letting things land is what I do. It's what I've always done. The line has variations. Elliot's our quiet achiever. Well, quiet anyway. 2 out of 3 turned out impressive, which isn't bad odds. Elliot's still figuring things out. Aren't you, sweetie? That last one was 4 years ago. I was 27. I had already been promoted twice. I was managing a team of 14 people. I was figuring things out the way an air traffic controller is playing with planes. 15 Thanksgivings. 15 versions of the same line. I could set a clock by it. Turkey at 2. Judith's update at 3:30. Elliot's erasure at 3:34. Pie at 4. Before I keep going, I need to give you something about Judith that makes the rest of this complicated. When I was 11 and came home from school with a bloody nose because a kid named Tyler Pruitt hit me during recess for no reason I ever figured out, my mother was at the door because the school had called. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't lecture. She sat me on the kitchen counter, which she had never done before or since, and held a bag of frozen peas against my face and said, "You know what, Elliot? Some people don't know what to do with someone quiet. That's their problem." She held those peas there for 10 minutes. We watched the kitchen window fog up from the heat inside, meeting the cold outside. She didn't put them down until the bleeding stopped, and I said I was fine, and she said, "I know you are." That's my mother at her best. The woman who held frozen peas to my face and called my quietness a strength. That same woman told a table of relatives I wasn't worth bragging about 6 years later and has been saying it annually since. I keep trying to put those 2 women in the same body, and the seams show every time. The hierarchy wasn't accidental. It was built early and reinforced on schedule. When we were kids, Glenn had a report card tradition. Best report card picks the restaurant for Friday dinner. Craig picked every single time from ages 8 to 17. 9 straight years. Not because his grades were always higher. In 7th grade, I brought home straight A's. Every subject. Glenn looked at the card, looked at me, and said, "Good, Elliot." But Craig's in AP history, so he edges you out. Craig was in 9th grade taking a class I wasn't eligible for, and somehow that was the tiebreaker. I never picked the restaurant. Not once in my entire childhood. By 8th grade, I stopped handing Glenn the report card altogether. I just left it on the counter. He never noticed it sitting there. College. Glenn sat me down at 17 in the kitchen, same counter Judith had put me on with the peas, and he said, "Let's be realistic about what makes sense for you, Elliot." Realistic. He steered me toward community college and a practical path. Something with my hands. Something steady. Craig got a 4-year university. Tuition, housing, meal plan. $72,000 over 4 years. Paid by Glenn and Judith. Lauren got a 4-year university. $64,000. Same deal. I got 2 years of community college at $8,400 and a conversation that started with, "Let's be realistic." I transferred to a state school on my own. Worked nights at a distribution warehouse to cover tuition and rent. Started at 10 p.m., finished at 6 a.m., went to class at 8. I learned logistics not from a professor, but from a loading dock at 2 a.m. with a handheld scanner and a thermos of gas station coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since Tuesday. Graduated with $34,000 in student debt. Took 11 years to pay off. Made my last payment 14 months ago on a Tuesday night at my kitchen table. Tess opened a bottle of wine. Nobody in my family noticed because nobody knew about the debt because nobody asked. I was good at baseball as a kid. Really good. My coach, a man named Peretti who chewed sunflower seeds and spat the shells into a Gatorade bottle during games, told Glenn I had genuine talent. Recommended a travel team. Cost $1,800 per year. Glenn said the family couldn't afford 2 sports programs because Craig was in club soccer. I quit baseball, put my glove in the garage, and didn't touch it for 2 years. 2 months after I quit, Glenn enrolled Lauren in a competitive dance program. $3,200 per year. I found the invoice 8 years later in his desk drawer while looking for tax forms I needed for a student loan application. The family couldn't handle $1,800 for my travel team, but could absorb $3,200 for Lauren's dance. I put the invoice back in the drawer. I have never said anything about it out loud until this moment right now while I'm typing. Judith's Christmas cards. 60 recipients every December. Family updates. I know this because a cousin named Rita kept every card in a shoebox because Rita keeps everything including grudges and expired coupons. She showed me the last 15 years at a barbecue last summer. I read through them standing next to a grill while hamburgers turned black because I lost track of time. Craig was mentioned every year. Every promotion, every relocation, every achievement. Lauren every year. Graduation, relationships, the engagement. I appeared in 2 of the 15 cards. 2014, and our youngest also graduated this spring. 2019, Elliot got married in October. My son's birth, not mentioned. My house purchase, not mentioned. My first promotion, second promotion, third promotion, not mentioned. 15 years and 2 half sentences. I put the cards back in the shoebox. Rita said, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, just hot out here." It was September. It was 84 degrees. I was not hot. I was something else, and I didn't have a name for it. My wife Tess noticed a pattern I'd been swallowing for so long it tasted normal. When Judith introduces her children, there's a system. This is my son Craig. He's a VP at Meridian Tech. Full beam. This is my daughter Lauren. She's engaged to Dr. Whitfield. Bigger beam. Then a gesture in my direction. And this is Elliot. No job. No detail. Sometimes just, and our youngest. A birth order instead of a person. Tess counted. 7 times in 4 years. 7 introductions where Craig and Lauren got titles and descriptors, and I got a first name or a number. The 7th time, in a grocery store, Judith introduced Craig to a woman from her church, and then said, "And this is our other one," while gesturing behind her without turning around. Tess gripped the cart handle and didn't say anything in the store. She said it in the car. She said, "If she calls you our other one again, I'm going to introduce myself as the other one's wife and see how that lands." She was only half joking. The parents' house has a hallway. Framed achievements. Craig's diplomas, 3 of them, with professional matting. His company headshot. A certification from some leadership program. Lauren's graduation, engagement photo, a picture from a trip to Portugal where she's standing on a cliff with the ocean behind her. My section is 1 photo. A family group shot from 2016 where I'm partially behind Craig's shoulder because the photographer said taller ones in back, and Craig stepped in front of me and nobody adjusted. My individual graduation photo was never framed. Tess asked Judith about it once. Judith said, "Oh, I think it's in a drawer somewhere. I'll find it." That was 3 years ago. It's still in the drawer. My wedding photo is on the mantle. It's the 4x6. Craig's engagement photo is the 8x10. Tess noticed the size difference on her first visit to that house and mentions it once per year with the precision of an accountant noting a recurring charge. Now Frank Coletti, 61, runs the distribution center. Voice like gravel in a tumble dryer. Handshake that could end a meeting. Terrible at small talk. Doesn't remember birthdays, including his own last year when his assistant put a cake in the break room and Frank walked past it and said, "Whose is that?" and nobody corrected him. He eats the same turkey sandwich from Morelli's Deli across the street every single day, and his assistant has tried to introduce variety for 6 years and has failed completely because Frank doesn't change things that work. Frank promoted me 3 times. The first time I said, "I didn't apply for that." He said, "I know. That's why you got it." The second time he left the promotion letter on my chair and walked away before I could argue. The third time he called me into his office and said, "Sit down. You're getting a raise and a title change. Don't make a speech." I didn't make a speech. For 4 years he's been mentoring me. Weekly lunches in his office with the door closed and sandwiches from Morelli's. He teaches me operations theory, how to read a balance sheet, how to fire someone without making it cruel, how to negotiate with vendors who think volume gives them leverage. He once said, with mustard on his thumb and a napkin he wasn't using, "Your problem isn't ability, Elliot. Your problem is you've been told you're ordinary by people who never looked." I drove home and sat in my driveway with the engine running. Tess came out after 15 minutes. She sat in the passenger seat. She didn't ask. I said, "My boss said something today." She said, "Good or bad?" I said, "I think good. I'm not sure yet." She sat with me until the porch light timer clicked off. We went inside. 18 months ago, the refrigeration system failed overnight. $600,000 in perishable inventory. I got the call at 11 p.m. and was on site by 11:40. I organized emergency redistribution to 3 backup facilities, rerouted 4 trucks mid-route, sourced 2 temporary cold storage units from a competitor I'd built a relationship with over 2 years of quiet professional favors. 72 hours straight. No sleep. Coffee from a machine that dispensed something brown and warm that was technically coffee in the way that a folding chair is technically furniture. Saved $540,000 of the $600,000. When it was over, 5 a.m. Thursday, I drove to a diner and bought breakfast for the entire night shift crew. $340 on my personal credit card. Pancakes and eggs and coffee for 14 people who'd been running on adrenaline and vending machine candy bars for 3 days. Frank told me later he watched on the security camera and didn't intervene. He said, "I wanted to see if you were who I thought you were." Nobody in my family has heard that story. Nobody has heard about any of it. The promotions, the publications, the crisis. Because nobody asks about my work. The last time it came up, Thanksgiving, Craig said, "What do you actually do all day, Elliot?" Judith laughed. I said, "Logistics." Craig said, "So, moving stuff from A to B?" I said, "Yeah, something like that." And I ate my turkey. 4 months ago, Frank wrote me a letter of recommendation for an industry leadership program I was nominated for. 2 pages. Single-spaced. He sent me a copy by email with a 1-line message. "For your records, don't argue with me about this." I read it at my desk during lunch. The break room was noisy behind me, someone microwaving something that smelled like burnt cheese, and I was reading sentences about myself that I didn't recognize. Not because they were wrong, because nobody had ever assembled those facts about me in one place before. The crisis, the breakfast, the promotions, the 3 publications, the 23 people I manage, 3 of whom left for management roles elsewhere and listed me as their primary reference. The time I stayed late for 6 weeks straight to redesign a routing system that saved the company $180,000 annually. Things I'd done and filed away because doing things and filing them away is what I do. Frank didn't file them. Frank wrote them down. He described me the way a father should describe a son. That's not what I thought when I first read it. That's what Tess said when she read it over my shoulder at the kitchen table later that night. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Frank wrote what Glenn should have said at your wedding toast." I didn't respond because my throat closed, and I did that thing where you pretend you're clearing it, but you're really just trying to hold yourself together over a piece of paper that a 61-year-old man with mustard on his thumb wrote about you in an office that smells like deli meat and printer ink. I read the letter again that night. Then I closed my laptop and walked to the bathroom and locked the door and stood there for 3 minutes looking at the tile floor. Not crying, just standing, letting the sentences settle into a body that wasn't used to carrying that kind of weight, the kind that comes from being seen. I splashed water on my face, went back to the kitchen. Tess didn't ask. She just handed me a glass of water and went back to reading. The last 3 sentences. Elliot is the most reliable person I have worked with in 2 decades of running this operation. He is the kind of man who makes everyone around him better without asking for credit or recognition. If I had a son in this industry, I would want him to be exactly like Elliot Kern. I carried those sentences for 3 weeks. I wasn't planning to read them at the dinner. I was just carrying them. The way you carry a key to a house you don't live in anymore. Then Judith left me a voicemail the morning of the dinner. "Elliot, be on time tonight. Your brother has a big announcement, so maybe keep your bit short, okay? You know how you can ramble. Your bit. Keep it short." I listened to it in the parking lot at work and sat there for about 5 minutes looking at the steering wheel. Then I opened the letter on my phone and read the 3 sentences one more time. Then I put the phone in my pocket and went inside and worked my shift and drove home and ironed a shirt I hadn't worn in 2 years and didn't tell Tess about the voicemail because I knew what she'd say and I needed to arrive at it myself. 2 days before, Craig called. To coordinate, not to connect. He said, "Dad wants everyone to share something they're proud of. I'm doing my promotion. Lauren's doing the engagement. What are you going to say?" I said, "I'll figure something out." Craig said, "Maybe keep it light. Something funny. You're good at that." He assigned me the comic relief slot at our parents' anniversary dinner the way you assign a seat at a kid's table. I hung up, sat at my kitchen table. Tess said, "What did he want?" I said, "He wants me to be funny." She was holding a dish towel, and her hair was up, and she had that look where she's already 3 sentences ahead of wherever I am. She said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want them to hear me." She said, "Then stop whispering." The night before, Tess found me at the table again, reading the letter on my laptop for probably the 10th time. She read it over my shoulder. She was quiet for a while. Then, "Frank wrote what your father should have said at your wedding. What your mother should have put in 15 years of Christmas cards. If you don't read it tomorrow, Elliot, I'm going to read it for you." She wasn't angry. She was tired of watching me compress myself into the space my family measured out when I was 12. I closed the laptop, opened it an hour later, closed it, printed the 3 sentences at 11 p.m. on a sheet of printer paper, folded it, put it in the jacket I was wearing tomorrow, went to bed, did not sleep. The dinner, Arnetta's, private room, 22 people. The seating told you everything before a word was spoken. Craig and his wife next to Glenn, Lauren and Dr. Whitfield next to Judith, Elliot and Tess at the end, the far end, next to an aunt named Deborah who was already discussing her herb garden before we sat down. Tess put her purse on the chair and looked at me and said nothing. I've been sitting at the end of the table since I was old enough to hold a fork. The end just had a place card with my name on it now. Glenn stood up after the main course, glass of red wine in his right hand, thanked everyone for 35 years of marriage. Judith beamed. Then he said, "I want to go around the table. Everyone share one thing you're most proud of." Craig first. He stood, described the VP promotion in detail. Title, department, salary, which he said out loud at a dinner table the way some people announce lottery numbers. $118,000. Office with a view. Team of 40. Glenn beamed with his whole face. Judith clapped. The table raised glasses. Then Craig added, casual, almost an afterthought, that the relocation package was tight and he could use a little help with the deposit. He looked at Glenn. Glenn nodded. $15,000. I know because Tess overheard Judith whisper the number to Aunt Deborah 10 minutes later while pretending to refill a water glass. $15,000 for the VP. At the same table where the warehouse guy has never been offered a professional dollar. Tess's hand found my knee under the tablecloth and squeezed. Lauren next. The engagement story. How Judith helped plan the surprise weekend. How Glenn flew to Boston to meet Dr. Whitfield's parents. The ring. The venue shortlist. Lauren was glowing. When she finished, Judith said, "We are so proud of you, sweetheart." Glenn said, "You deserve every bit of it, Lauren." Proud. They said it twice. 30 seconds. 2 times. I went backward in my head. Every holiday. Every birthday. Every phone call. Every report card. I searched 27 years for one instance of that word aimed at me. I couldn't find it. Not once. The word existed in my family's vocabulary. It had simply never been shipped to my address. Glenn looked down the table, past the salad plates and the wine glasses and the aunt discussing perennials. "Elliot, your turn. What about you?" I could feel the paper in my jacket. I could feel Tessa's hand still on my knee. I could feel 22 people already arranging their faces into the patient, polite expression they wear when the quiet one talks. Expecting something short, something humble, something that makes them smile and lets the evening move to dessert. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the paper, unfolded it. Craig shifted in his chair. The creak of the folding chair was the loudest sound in the room. Judith tilted her head. I started reading. My voice was steady for the first sentence. "Elliot is the most reliable person I have worked with in 2 decades of running this operation." The table went still, not quiet. Still. The difference is that quiet is the absence of sound. Still is the absence of movement. Nobody moved. He is the kind of man who makes everyone around him better without asking for credit or recognition. Glenn's glass stopped, 6 inches from his lips. The wine shifted toward the rim. He didn't set it down. He just stopped moving. If I had a son in this industry, I would want him to be exactly like Elliot Kern. I folded the paper, put it back in my pocket. I said, "That was written by my boss. His name is Frank Coletti. He runs a $40 million operation. He wrote it for a leadership program I was nominated for." I paused. "That's my bit. Sorry it wasn't funny." I didn't look up for a few seconds. I was looking at the folded paper in my hand. When I raised my eyes, the room had rearranged itself in ways I hadn't seen in 27 years of sitting at family tables. Craig was staring at his plate with his jaw working like he was chewing something that wasn't food. His wife had her hand on his arm, but he wasn't acknowledging it. Lauren had one hand over her mouth and her eyes were wet, and she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't name, something between shock and something older, something that might have been guilt if I'm being generous, and I'm trying to be. Judith was staring at me like someone had replaced her son between courses. Not angry, not sad, confused. The confusion of a woman who spent 27 years organizing her children into categories and just watched one of them step out of the box she built for him. Glenn's glass was on the tablecloth. He'd set it down without noticing. A small red circle was spreading on the white linen from where the wine had tipped, growing outward in a ring, and nobody moved to blot it. Silence. 15 seconds of it. The kind that has physical weight, the kind you can feel pressing on the surface of your skin like humidity before a storm. Aunt Deborah, who had been discussing the difference between rosemary and thyme for the better part of an hour, and who I'm fairly sure was the only person at the table having a genuinely relaxing evening, put her hand on my arm. She didn't say a word. She just put her hand there and left it. Tess, next to me, picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip like she was watching the credits roll on a film she'd seen before and liked the ending of. Judith spoke first. "Elliot, why didn't you ever tell us about?" I said, "Tell you about what, Mom?" "You'd have to ask first." She said, "I ask about you." I said, "You ask if I'm coming to Thanksgiving. You ask if I can fix the garage door. You ask if I'll pick up the cake. You have never once asked me what I do for a living. You've never asked me if I'm good at it. You've never asked me anything that couldn't be answered in one word." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Glenn was staring at the wine stain on the tablecloth like it was a puzzle he was trying to solve. After dinner. Parking lot. Glenn walked me to the car. Cold enough to see our breath. He stood there with his hands in his coat pockets, rocking slightly on his heels the way he does when he's uncomfortable. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He said, "I didn't know about the crisis. The 72 hours." I said, You never asked, Dad. He nodded. One nod. Slow. The nod of a man who just heard a question he understood for the first time and realized he didn't have the answer. That's all. A nod in a parking lot next to a car that needed washing and two men who didn't know how to stand next to each other without a table between them. Craig caught me by the door. He said, "That was a lot, Elliot. You could have just told us." I said, "You called me 3 days ago and told me to keep it light and maybe say something funny." He went quiet. Then, "I didn't mean it like that." I said, "Yeah, Craig, you did. You just didn't know you meant it." He stood there with his car keys, turning in his hand like he was trying to unlock something that didn't have a keyhole. I got in the car. Tess was already in the passenger seat. She didn't ask how it went. She already knew. Judith found me at the coat check area. She'd been crying, the kind that doesn't make sound but leaves tracks. She said, "That letter, Elliot. Why didn't you ever?" I said, "Mom, you told me this morning to keep my bit short." She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "I didn't mean." I said, "You've been meaning it for 15 Thanksgivings." I put on my coat and walked to the car. In the weeks after, things came out. The kind of things that stay buried when everyone is performing and surface when the performance stops. Craig's VP relocation had already burned through its package. He'd spent the signing bonus on a car lease he couldn't sustain. The $15,000 he asked for at the dinner was the visible request. The real number, which Tess learned from Lauren's fiancé at a family gathering 2 weeks later where everyone was being uncomfortably honest for the first time, was $35,000. Credit card debt at $42,000. 3 years of living 2 tax brackets above his actual life. Leasing German cars and buying rounds at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than my grocery bill, all to maintain the image that Judith bragged about in Christmas cards and Glenn nodded at across dinner tables. The VP's salary of $118,000 that Craig announced like a stock ticker was being consumed by debt servicing at a rate that would make an accountant wince. Lauren and Dr. Whitfield's orthodontic practice is not thriving the way the engagement story implied. They've been borrowing from Judith quietly for wedding expenses because the practice revenue has been flat for 2 years and the student loan debt from dental school is still at $190,000. The 2 children worth bragging about are both financially tethered to the parents who brag about them. The child who moves boxes, the son not worth mentioning in Christmas cards, the one who got, let's be realistic, instead of a tuition check, owns his house outright. Zero debt since 14 months ago. Retirement fund ahead of schedule by 6 years according to his financial advisor. $97,000 salary that nobody at the anniversary dinner knew about because the system never required him to have one. The system only required him to be less. Frank heard about the dinner. Tess called him. She said he deserved to know what his words did in that room. 2 weeks later, I found a framed copy of the letter on my desk. New frame. Professional matting. Sticky note on the glass in Frank's handwriting. Put this somewhere people can see it. You've hidden long enough. I hung it on my office wall. First framed achievement I've ever displayed anywhere. Marcus, a 23-year-old on my team who reminds me of myself except he hasn't learned to go quiet yet, which I hope he never does, saw it and said, "That's from Frank? That's basically a medal, man." I looked at it after he left. Somebody's pride in me made physical, made visible, hanging on a wall in a room where people can see it. That's new for me. My uncle, Glenn's brother, called the week after. He was at the dinner. He said, "Your mother's been telling us for years you're still finding your way. I thought you were barely employed, Elliot." I had no idea. I said, 3 promotions and 7 years of finding my way. He was quiet. Then he said something I keep turning over in my head like a coin I found on the ground. He said, "Your father isn't sorry. He's embarrassed. And there's a difference. Sorry means he'd go back and change something. Embarrassed means he got caught not looking." 6 weeks after, Glenn emailed me. Not a text. Not a call. An email, which for Glenn is the equivalent of writing a letter by hand because Glenn doesn't email. He has Judith forward things for him. 3 sentences. I read the letter again. "I got a copy from your wife. I don't know when I stopped seeing you, but I know it was my fault." I read it at my desk during a Tuesday morning that smelled like the burnt cheese from the break room, microwave, and Frank's turkey sandwich from Morelli's. I read the email twice. Didn't respond. Didn't delete it. Moved it to a folder called Nice Ones. The folder is where I keep every thank you message I've ever received from the people I work with. Former employees who write on holidays. A warehouse driver named Pat who sends a Christmas note every year that says, "You're the only manager who learned my name the first week." Marcus, who texted me last month just to say, "I'm staying because of you, just so you know." 41 messages in that folder. 40 from people who watched me work and decided I was worth a sentence. One from my father, who watched me grow up and needed 27 years and a dinner and a stranger's letter to write his first one. He made the list. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if 41 is a lot or a little. I know the folder exists, and I know I open it sometimes on bad days, and I know my father's email is in there now, sitting between Pat's Christmas message and a note from a forklift operator named Ding who I trained in 2021 and who got promoted last March and who wrote to tell me he couldn't have done it without me. 2 months after the dinner, I sat down and wrote a letter, not to my family, to Frank. I wrote what I'd never been able to say to his face because Frank's office has a way of making everything feel operational even when it's personal. I wrote that his recommendation letter was the first time anyone described me as something more than adequate, that the phrase, "if I had a son in this industry," made me lock myself in a bathroom at Arnetta's restaurant while my wife stood outside the door saying, "Take your time," through the wood. That the framed copy on my office wall is the first time someone's belief in me has been something I could look at with my eyes and touch with my hands and show to other people and say this is what someone thinks of me, not what my family thinks, but what someone who actually watched me work decided I was worth. I gave Frank the letter in person, in his office, Tuesday afternoon. He was finishing the turkey sandwich from Morelli's. He had a napkin on his lap that he never uses correctly. It's always half off his knee. And he was brushing crumbs off the recommendation letter he'd sent me, which he'd apparently printed a copy of for himself and keeps in his top drawer. He read my letter, folded it, put it in the desk drawer next to his copy of the recommendation and a photo of his daughter and a calculator from the 1990s that still works and that he refuses to replace because, in Frank's words, it adds correctly and that's all a calculator needs to do. He looked toward the window. His eyes were wet, but he turned only halfway because Frank doesn't do that. Not all the way. He said, "Get back to work." I closed the door behind me. Quietly, he said 3 words. They were the right 3. Subscribe. More coming. Not all of them in this quiet.